Hello, good morning. My name is Miguel Amado. I am the director of Sirius Art Center. Welcome to this event. I will allow my colleague Ellie O'Byrne to do the formal introduction of the session and the context in which it's operating. I just would like to say that we are recording this event for the purpose of documentation, as well as for public dissemination through Sirius YouTube page, as well as a page at Agent Opportunity that will compile a set of resources that we've been developing together. The first part is going to be recorded and made totally public. The second part will be recorded, but will only be made public by request. So that second part will enable a Q&A, and you can feel that you are in a safe space, and anything that is said is not going to be shared widely. Also, I want to thank Ellie for joining us in mediating and moderating this session, as well as Kevin, Susan, and Helga, who are here representing MusicAlive. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Siobhan Clancy, the Community Arts Officer at the Cork City Council, who has been spearheading these projects, and Marie Brett, an artist we've been also working with. I'm joined by my colleague, Brian McDonnell, and we will hope that this session will be of interest to all of you. So without further ado, I'll let you proceed. Helly, thank you so much for all of you to be here today.
So thanks very much, Miguel, and welcome to the first of the What Next Arts and Aging workshops. My name is Ellie O'Byrne. I'm a Cork-based arts journalist. So these workshops are part of Strand 3 of the Creative Inquiry Arts and Older People Initiative, which was an artist residency and older people's engagement project that began actually in 2019, before COVID. This is a strategic partnership between Cork City and County Council Arts Offices and the HSE and Age and Opportunity, and along with the partner organisations of Cork Midsummer Festival, MusicAlive, who we're going to be hearing from today, and Sirius Arts Centre. And this was all supported by the Arts Council's Invitation to Collaboration scheme. So these workshops are designed to be of interest to anyone who's working in an arts context or a healthcare setting, who are considering arts engagements with older people and have considerations around that. Brian tells me there might be still a couple of one-on-one half-hour clinics available today between 2 and 5. You can book these by contacting Brian in the chat if you want to get further information, if you feel that the session doesn't take you as far as you'd like to go with your questions, although we are going to have lots of time for Q&A during this. So this is the first session of 3, and this session is with Kevin O'Shanahan, Susan McManamon, and Helga Deasy, and it's loosely titled, How Do We Embed the Arts in Health and Community Settings? We're going to learn from the experiences of Susan and Helga, who partnered with MusicAlive for their Creative Inquiry residency in 2019. So they collaborated on a series of workshops in music and movement in Nazareth House Nursing Home in Mallow and with Mayfield Men's Shed Choir. Just a little bit on structure. So in a moment, we're going to begin the workshop, and the morning is going to be divided into 2 sessions. So we're going to hear from the artists and from MusicAlive, and then we're going to take a 10-minute break. And then when we come back, we're going to hold a questions and answer session. And during that, participants can be free, if they want, to type questions into the chat and I can read them out, or you can use the raise hand function as well if you'd prefer to ask your own questions. So without any further ado, I'm just going to introduce the participants this morning. So Kevin O'Shanahan is the Creative Director of MusicAlive. Kevin is a musician who began working in participatory arts practice with Waterford Spree in 1994. And over the past 20 years, he's focused on arts and health practice. He's also a nurse specialist in recovery and the arts with Cork Mental Health Services. And he's a co-founder of 49 North Street in Skibbereen. And then we're also joined by Helga Deasy, who is originally from Germany. She is a dance artist and a choreographer and a teacher based in Cork. Her practice draws from choreological studies and somatic principles, and she enjoys collaborating with other art forms. And she is the Cork City Dance Artist in Residence at the Firkin Crane for 2021 and 2022. And she tells me that she feels very passionate about the empowering and transformative potential of dance. And she's worked in arts and health settings for the past 10 years. And she worked alongside Susan McManamon. Susan is a Cork-based musician, choir director and teacher. She's the music director with Bantry and Drimalee community choirs. She performs with the Vespertine Quintet and has collaborated with musicians, dancers, poets and writers. So I'm going to hand over to Kevin, Susan and Helga now, and I'll be joining in again later for the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ellie. It's lovely to be here this morning, and good morning to everyone. Before we get into the workshop, I'm just going to share a little bit around the background of MusicAlive, just to give you some context, I suppose, to the type of work we're involved in. So MusicAlive was set up in 2009 by myself and another musician, Caoimhe Conlon, who Caoimhe is a lecturer in community music in the Cork School of Music. And I suppose really, Caoimhe and I were very fortunate that in 2007, we had been musicians for the Waterford Healing Arts Trust. And we were invited to participate in a European Music and Health project that involved residencies in France and in the UK. And the project leads for that project were the French organization Musique et Santé, which translates as Music and Health. At that time, I suppose, I mean, the Waterford Healing Arts Trust, again, were, I suppose, really doing pioneering work in Ireland, really, but this was in the very early stages. You know, it was the first I had really come across hearing about music and health as a practice. And this was a year-long program. So I suppose in ways, Caoimhe and I returned to Ireland probably, we were definitely passionate and probably almost on a mission, maybe a little bit too much so at times, but in terms really what we had seen in France really opened our eyes to the power of music making. Not alone the power of music making, but also that how in France it was considered a right as a citizen that you had access to music, to the arts, to culture. So hospitals, community settings, all these institutions, you know, had artistic programs. Now, at the same time in Ireland, I was working as a nurse as well in a hospital setting in Cork. So I could immediately see, not alone, you know, there was a huge practical benefit. So in terms, you know, you had on one side, you had the creative work and the magic that brings and you know, all that which will again be, Susan and Helga, we're gonna delve into deeper in the workshop. But I just want to flag as well that also you could really see, I could really see very quickly, you know, there's such, this is improving people's lives in such practical ways. And again, since many of the projects, since that's a theme I've seen throughout the years. Brian, I might just check there if the slides are running at the minute. Yeah, that's great. If they are. Yeah.
Sorry, no, they're not. I'm just having a...
Yeah, look, I'll just flag there anyway. We're working on there. There would be some slides, hopefully, that will be just showing different examples of some of the projects we've been involved in. And they're just a selection of people, of places and projects that we found inspiring in our work. So anyway, to return then, Caoimhe and I, so we set up MusicAlive in 2009. We were involved in, we were lucky again to continue our work in Waterford, particularly at the start, and that soon transferred to Cork. Significant projects would have been the Capital of Culture. You know, there was a lot of work had been done earlier in 2005 from the Cork Capital of Culture. So we were able to link into some of that work. I know Marie Brett, for instance, was very involved in projects, and that also was a very significant project in Cork. So we were fortunate really to be able to get involved in some of the legacy from those projects. And a very significant project then, which feeds into our work today specifically, was a project called Fuse, which took place between 2014 and 2017. And for this project, MusicAlive, we project managed different arts and health projects that took place in 5 healthcare and community settings throughout Cork City and County. And this slide actually is a perfect match in terms of Fuse, because our aim with Fuse really was to light that spark of creativity in settings that maybe hadn't hitherto accessed creative opportunities or really seen arts and health in practice. The second important element of Fuse as well was that it also provided a tremendous opportunity for us to try and work in a way where we combined art forms. And so we had some wonderful projects and opportunities for artists where musicians could work with animators. You know, there was all kinds. Helga, Deasy there was very involved in terms of movement, and Marie Brett again, in terms of visual art. And I suppose with Fuse again, we got very strong feedback from the artists that this opportunity to collaborate was so welcome, because often in arts and health practice you work solo or individually, and it can be quite, you know, it can be at times challenging in that sense, in that sometimes your practice you can feel somewhat isolated. So a project like Fuse allowed for artists to come together, and then of course you had the wonderful synergies from the work. And Helga and Susan then are going to expand on this later as we get into the workshop. But during a project like Fuse, we had a chance to start working around the voice and movement and combining these together. I remember distinctly around this time, there was a proverb from Africa that we often, that resonated with us, which was, if you can talk, you can sing. And if you can walk, you can dance. And we really love this idea of, you know, that the arts being just part of our everyday lives, and that how do we meet the person as an artist, and how do we subtly move from everyday life into that creative space where the magic really happens. So we were very fortunate again that the Fuse project was in partnership with the Cork Arts and Health Partnership. And I'd just like to mention there, you know, early champions of this work like Aidan Warner, who really did so much work in setting up structures and putting, you know, Aidan worked as a community health worker with the HSE and really did tremendous work in terms of even what continues today of putting structures in place for that. So really then, as I've mentioned, Helga Deasy would have been part of the Fuse project. Around this time as well, then Susan McManamon and I started to work together through the wonderful Bantry Community Choir. And the Bantry Community Choir is a great example again of a choir based in a community where, you know, I would say, you know, it's made up primarily of people who would be considered of older age, over 55 or 55 or over. But I remember a workshop here, and Eileen O'Leary, you can see on your screen. Eileen is part of the choir. Eileen's also a photographer and a dancer. And I remember a particular session where with the choir, Eileen brought in some simple movements, and the fun, the energy, the creativity in the room, and how the voice and movement again seemed to fuse together really inspired us again in terms of our interest of trying to refine, you know, how the voice and movement actually, you know, when they're together, it seemed at times that so much more was possible. So that's really the background that took us then to the Creative Inquiry. So when we got the opportunity to be part of the Creative Inquiry, and we had some, you know, this background work done with really great artists like Susan and Helga, we were really delighted to be able to have the opportunity to get to delve in further and to build on what we had learned. And I'd also like just to mention there that we were also very fortunate that Arnold Thomas Fanning, the writer, could join us as our witness writer for the first phase of the Creative Inquiry. And that added a whole reflective element to the project. And again, I'm sure Susan and Helga will talk about this a little later. But again, you know, these opportunities to collaborate again are at the heart of the type of work that we do. We really believe and have learned that the more ways we have into creativity and the more ways we can offer to people, rather than, so we I mentioned when Puiv and I returned from France, our focus would have been primarily music, but we've learned over the years that, the power of collaboration and how the different art forms fit together. I'm going to finish now with a quote, but well, not so much a quote, but I think it was Anthony Storr mentioned that if we go back in time, that music, poetry and movement they weren't separate practices. They were, if we go back to Greek times, they were presented as one. So that really appealed to us too. So look, I hope that gives you a picture of the type of work that we're involved in. Again, we can come back to anything later in the questions and answers, but I'm going to start moving on now to, I'm just going to give you an idea of the kind of plan that we have for the workshop session. So really, Ellie has pointed out again, we'll have a short break. Before we have the short break, Susan and Helga and I are going to reflect on the learning from this phase of the creative inquiry. This is going to be more an informal discussion really than a formal presentation. And it's wonderful for us to have the opportunity again to reflect and to share some of what we've learned with you and to hear your thoughts later really. I'd just like to highlight that, the nature of the discussion, it's going to focus on the practice. We will draw from some academic research, and there's plenty of it there. And if we will highlight some of that, but we're not going to get into it in detail. So the focus really will be on the practice more than the research for this particular session. And then we're going to talk as well about, again, we're going to hear from Susan and Helga really what they have learned as artists during this project, how it's going to feed into our future work together in health and community contexts. So I'm going to stop a little now. Well, I'll continue for a minute, but Helga and Susan are going to join me there. And to kick off our session then, I'm going to direct the first question to Susan. But Susan, before I start, I came across this quotation. I'm just going to read a quotation from the British Medical Journal. So this is from an editorial piece in 2002. And to me, it just sets a nice wider context again of the role of the arts in health. So, in an unwinnable battle against death, pain, and sickness, more and more of life's processes and difficulties, birth, death, sexuality, aging, unhappiness, tiredness, loneliness, perceived imperfections in our bodies are being medicalized. Medicine cannot solve these problems. It can sometimes help, but often at a substantial cost. People become patients, stigma proliferates, large sums are spent. The treatments may be poisonous and disfiguring. Worst of all, people are diverted from what may be much better ways to adjust to their problems. This may be where the arts can help. The arts don't solve problems. So, as I mentioned, this is an editorial from the British Medical Journal. It's taken from 2002. So I think it's interesting to maybe revisit here, where we have come from really. And Susan, I'd like to start. So as this piece states, there are many ways to approach healthcare that are not about the acute experience or about the clinical experience maybe. And I'm interested to hear from you, in your experience in the creative inquiry, can you tell me a little about what you've learned about maybe, how you've seen people manage their health conditions or manage their well-being through their engagement with the arts?
God, Kevin, that's a great question, and there's an awful lot to unpack, I think, with that quote. With that as a topic, we could fill a whole workshop with that in itself. Maybe to, as you say, draw it back into the experience that myself and Helga had while working on the creative Inquiry. You know, we've discussed many times how, you know, I think lucky and how grateful we are too now that we look back and let that work resonate a little. But we got to work with 2 settings, and they were quite distinct settings in one sense, and then there was a lot of similarities and overlap. So it gave myself and Helga, I think, as artists, a lot to think about. So we've got just a couple of images here from maybe the work itself, and we'll go through those, but I might just paint a little picture about those settings and the groups that we worked with. We worked in Nazareth House, which is a care home, a residential care home in Mallow in North Cork. And Helga, who's here with us, was the lead artist in this particular setting. And you'll see from these images here, this is the lobby that we walked into each week that we worked there. And it's a really a very beautiful residential home. And the setting itself, you know, we were looking at North Cork, rolling hills, and this old building that has been really beautifully decorated, and just the comfort, I suppose, of this setting was something that was really striking. And, you know, I'll talk a little bit about the ethos maybe in just a moment, but, you know, just the environment itself, we were in nature, there was horses running in the fields. I think one of the first times I drove up there. And then in this lobby and in this building, we had spoke to the Director of Nursing about this later, and just how it really struck us, what a fabulous environment. And she explained to us that the hotel had been, or the care home had been decorated and designed to be a place of comfort for the residents. So it had been, the residents' comfort was the main thing in mind when they looked at what this building was going to be like. They wanted the images that you're looking at here, this area, they wanted it to feel like a hotel, so that for residents who couldn't leave the care home, that they could come down to the lobby with their families and feel like they were having a day out. So just maybe even that in itself, it was the level of detail that was put into this setting was really striking the moment you walked in the door. I mentioned our first conversation with the Director of Nursing. It was really striking for myself and Helga as artists to really see and feel that the ethos of that environment was going to have a huge impact on our work. The staff, the Director of Nursing, was extremely open and very supportive from the very, very get-go. It was really clear that there was a fantastic understanding of the arts. There was experience of arts in Nazareth House, and the understanding that the arts and what it could bring to residents in the home was very, very clear. This wasn't just to be a form of entertainment. So that also meant that myself and Helga were able to come in and to start directly get really stuck into the actual work. We didn't have to create that kind of environment. We worked with a group of around 20 participants, and you see some lovely images here of, I see Helga in conversation with one of the residents. A lot of these residents were in chairs, things like mobility had to be considered, and we worked together to really, I suppose, with the group to make sure that everybody was comfortable when they were working with us each week. The level of activities also that I think were available in the care home was incredible to see. The residents here and the participants in our group had activities every day of the week, and the importance that was put on those as to how that would help with the residents to make their experience a pleasant one, and to keep them active and to keep them engaged, and to give everybody a chance to have something that they were interested in. That was something, again, that was very clear to see. And then we also were lucky to work in Mayfield Men's Shed. And Mayfield Men's Shed was at the time, these gentlemen were meeting once and twice a week in Newbury House in Mayfield. And Newbury House was a community setting and very much again rooted in the heart of Mayfield in the city. The gents have since moved to the GAA in Mayfield, but you can, again, that contrast even of urban and rural was something that really struck us. This was very much again rooted in the community of the city. The building itself also housed a whole lot of other activities around the community. There was one thing that really struck us again was there was a daycare centre for children. So while we were doing our work, you would hear the children outside running around and playing games. Again, the ethos of the warm welcome was just incredible. This was an established group of men who had been meeting together regularly for a number of years. There was fantastic social interaction among the gentlemen. And as we entered, it's very difficult even to describe to here, but the warm welcome that was given to us all, that's myself and Helga and Arnold Fanning. There was a choir within Mayfield Men's Shed, and in our first discussions with them, it was quite clear that the choir was of huge importance, and we worked with the choir to explore voice and movement with them as a group, and that was something that it was the pride that was in that choir meant that it was something that we could connect with as artists, and it gave us the starting point to be able to work with them. So there was a lot of maybe similarities. There was also maybe a number of differences, but I'm going to talk maybe a little bit specifically about the work itself. So we had 16 sessions in each of the settings. That's 16 sessions in Nazareth House, 16 sessions in Mayfield Men's Shed. We opened each session with Arnold bringing a reading to the group, just to kind of bring us and center us into the room for each workshop that we did. And then we would conduct some workshop or some warm-ups with both groups. So introducing some focus on the body, on the posture, and alignment, on breathing, gentle stretches, and then we would move to vocal warm-ups. Initially, we started with things that were familiar to both groups, maybe songs that everybody knew, or movements that everybody knew, stretching gently and bringing that sense of togetherness and cohesion into the group. And then we gradually developed with the two groups as we got to know each other and maybe gained trust. In terms of, how that work developed, we took slightly different approaches maybe with the two groups. In Nazareth House, we worked on a sound and a movement scape, introducing some gentle improvisation, both with movement and with the voice. We used the body, we used percussion, we used the seats that they were sitting on, we used movement sounds that they could make on the floor, all under kind of the theme, should we say, of the sea. And then in Mayfield Men's Shed, we looked a lot about expressing emotions in the body and the impact that can have upon the sound that they make together as a choir. So listen, there's so much detail we could go into there, but there's also, we could take up the full workshop. We won't do that. So Kevin, I think you might have a thing or two to say at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And again, that's really interesting there. And thank you. In ways, what I'm hitting at here, I suppose, with that quote at the start, is in some ways to show coming from, there in 2002, really, when we're going back to again, which coincides where a lot of this work started to develop in Ireland. But this idea, I think what you've outlined there to me, when you describe a care setting like a hotel, and like this was the ethos, and I think again, when I link into that editorial, it's not about the arts solving all the problems of the world, but it's about what we can bring and what we, it strikes me, and I visited Nazareth House and Mayfield, and it really struck me too, in terms of a healthcare environment, the awareness too, as you say, from the director of nursing and from, you know, the culture almost that the arts again can help us to cope. We can't cure everything, but there's such a valid role in helping us to live our lives in as best way as possible. And I think, as you've alluded to there, what's very interesting is the, you know, through this creative inquiry again, we have a care setting, a residential care setting, and a community setting. But what struck me when I visited Mayfield Men's Shed as well, that even though we're in the community, there's a lot of health benefit taking place. I mean, I know there was the dramatic example of a member of the choir who was, you know, had just been diagnosed with early onset dementia. And yet the community gathered round this person. And you could see here that in terms of care there, or in terms of being, you know, in terms of the benefit to your well-being, and this is all taking place in the community setting. I'd just like to reference at this point as well, then, in terms of this merging of where healthcare actually takes place, and this idea that healthcare doesn't always have to happen in health institutions, if you like. In West Cork there, through Healthy Ireland, there's a wellbeing network was established in the last, it's been running for 3 or 4 years at this stage. But the wellbeing network, you know, eat again, and this is through the work, as I say, of Healthy Ireland and Priscilla Lynch and Sheila Broderick, who were rolling this out, where, you know, health interventions are happening in the community. In all sorts of ways again. And I'm just, you know, I've really seen during this project again how the arts again being part of that have so much to offer. So as you say, Susan, we could really, you know, we don't have time to really get in depth, but thank you there for setting the context to the settings. You know, I'd like to turn now, you know, link to this and link to this point really, Helga, I'm going to ask you in terms of, I suppose what we've been describing there in some ways, Susan and I are talking about, is the idea of this almost a health-friendly creative practice, if you like. And as Ellie pointed out in her introduction, I know you're passionate yourself around the, you know, the potential of the arts to empower and to transform. And I know you had a very interesting reflective piece on artsandhealth.ie that I would direct people to do, which goes into this in detail in terms of your practice. So Helga, I'd just like to ask you, would you tell us a little bit more then? I mean, building on from, you know, Susan has set the context, but just in terms of your own practice, in terms there of empowerment, transformation around the arts, you might just share a little bit more of what you've learned during the creative inquiry.
Yeah, so I suppose empowerment and transformation is something that has informed my practice for a long time. I started during my MA, I researched that specifically, and then it's just something that continued to inform my practice that I've been coming back to and refining as well. And there's a few kind of elements within an art practice that make a practice empowering, because they're terms that we use a lot. And one of those elements is freedom. So creating a space where people are free to make their own choices, their own creative and their own artistic choices, as well as choices around what it is that they want to engage with, for example. And then the other elements are self-discovery, authenticity, and individuality, and expressing your individuality, but through that connecting with other people. And so both in the creative inquiry as well as in the Fuse program, which came before, I think in that kind of respect, there's been a lot of learning around what constitutes a health-friendly arts practice. And I'm going to look at this question maybe from two perspectives. So one is kind of the work on the ground that Susan and I did, and how we worked, and how that approach really fostered well-being. And then I'm going to look at it from a slightly wider context, in what kind of key elements are there that make any arts practice health-friendly. So to come back to kind of our direct work on the ground. So Susan and I worked collaboratively, and we really looked into how we connect the two art forms of voice and of movement. So not just layering one on top of the other, but really finding the interconnection between the two art forms. And there were a few elements that we specifically worked with. And one of those was the breath. So our breath, like one reason for it simply was that it's our source for movement and it's also our source for voice. So by focusing on the breath, we can really then kind of delve into both art forms together, but also working with the breath. What we found and experienced over the years that it is something, it is very simple and it is accessible to absolutely everyone. As long as you live, you have breath. So no matter what other restrictions you might experience in the body, if you may have illnesses or injuries or any other things that may hold you back, you can always come to your breath. And from there, you can start something new. So that has been a very key element. Then the second element is that we looked at our alignment, our posture, or to put it maybe, our connectivity within the body and into the ground. And again, that is something that we found. So our posture, it expresses how we feel. For example, when you're sad, you make yourself a little bit smaller. When you're tired, you stoop down a bit. Whereas when you're feeling happy, your chest opens, your spine opens. But you can also affect how you feel by working with your posture. So simply by sitting up or standing up, allowing your spine to lengthen, you will change how you feel. You notice that this changes how you relate to yourself, to your own body and your movement, but also it affects your voice and the sound of the voice. So this was a really interesting connection, and it very much affects your well-being, of course, just as the breath. And a third element that Susan touched on a little bit as well that we worked with was imagery. And imagery, again, it was a way of making our work accessible. So rather telling people specifically what they had to do, we used an image, for example, the image of the sea. And that image would inspire movement and it would inspire sounds, but it would be a much more open approach. So people would be able to contribute within that or explore that image how it suited them. So this was a way of making the work more accessible, as well as the fact that we work together and with two art forms. So there might be people who are more comfortable when it comes to singing. There might be people who are more comfortable when it comes to movement. So in this way, we offered people different ways into expressing, as well as a richer way of expressing by bringing in and connecting the two art forms. So this were kind of the elements that we used very much working on the ground with the people. But then kind of maybe from a slightly wider perspective, we found again that there were kind of key points that were really important for our practice. And one of those was a focus on process rather than product. So taking away the pressure of having something finished at the end or people feeling they have to present something, we're really focused on being in the moment. This is where the notion of in the moment composition comes in. That's very key to the work of MusicAlive as well. So it's about the immediate interaction that happens in the room with the people, responding to people and people responding to each other, where really the magic happens in the moment. And sometimes that can be difficult to capture or to preserve, but we found that, yeah, in the process, in the moment, often is where the real magic happens. Another point is that we worked with the participants very much as collaborators. So the participants were an active partner in the creation process. So it wasn't so much that we brought in our ideas. We may have offered some things to get people going, but especially in the beginning of our project, it was very much about engaging in a dialogue with the people and listening to what they are interested in and what they want to work with, what is meaningful to them. And really by listening and by engaging with the people and responding to their needs, to their wishes, to their interests, is where we found we could make the work very meaningful. And connected with this is a sense of mutuality and reciprocity. It's not a one-way street, but it's working together with the people in the room. Yeah, another point is inclusivity and accessibility. That's something that I've already touched on. And as well as to develop relationships, both with the participants and with the settings. And by doing so, building trust. And we found that this is something that it takes time, and it is something that you have to invest in as a practitioner. But only by doing that, you can create a safe space, you can create that trust that is necessary for people to maybe show a more vulnerable side, to feel that they are truly able to express themselves, to be authentic. Yeah, and to take that time to build these relationships. And very much we took a holistic approach. So by working with the breath, with the movement, with sound, with rhythm, yeah, so we've included a lot of elements that spoke to people in many different ways. Yeah, so much for a health and the arts practice.
Great, Helga, thank you. And again, I know it's difficult in a short space of time to really unpack, you know, to really get in, but to the specific detail. But I'm struck there. I just like to, I think that's very interesting in terms of the breath and in terms of healthcare. You know, we're seeing more and more. I'm sure you've heard there, you know, particularly during the past 2 years, we've all experienced. You'll often hear in the media now. There's such evidence there in terms of how quickly focusing on our breath actually realigns our whole nervous system. And we could talk again for a long time about this. There's lots of neuroscientific evidence that for such a simple thing as literally slowing the breath has huge benefits, very significant health benefits. So it's very interesting that that's a key part of your artistic practice as well. There's a medical doctor in the States, John Kabat-Zinn, who would describe the future of healthcare as being participatory, that everyone plays their part. And as I'm listening here to this discussion, I think in ways that I can see that happening here already, glimpses of where people, you know, as you've outlined there, the holistic approach in healthcare language, it might be termed the person-centered approach, but they're the same thing, the mind, body, spirit, or the person-centered. The choice again of the person being involved and being at the center of their own healthcare. So thank you very much for that. Helga, I think the show we were going to take a slight pause now around the breath, I think, here. So I'll pass back to you there for this.
Yeah, so we'll just take a few minutes to experience our breathing, to get a first-hand experience of focusing on our breath. And I have a little device here. I actually found it at a fun fair, but I love this colorful device because it just demonstrates really nicely what the breath can do for our body. So if this is our body, if we take a deep breath, we can use the breath to expand our body and to create space inside our body simply by breathing. And I'd like to invite you to try this. So taking your hands and placing them onto the belly. And if it feels comfortable, you can close your eyes for this, or maybe just bring them to a soft and low gaze, just to bring the focus internal. And then simply resting your awareness on the breathing. Noticing the inhale. Noticing the exhale. Maybe becoming aware of the slight pause at the top of the inhale and at the end of the exhale. Noticing how the breath may slow down and how it may begin to lengthen. And then consciously sending your breath all the way down into the belly, allowing the belly to expand, breathing into the hands, On the inhale, expanding the belly, creating space. And on the exhale, allowing the belly to soften and to release. Inhale to open, to expand. Exhale to soften, to release. And staying with this breath, but now taking one hand and placing it up to the chest, to the space just underneath the collarbones. And again, breathing all the way down into the belly with your next inhale. But this time allowing the breath to expand up into the chest. So the hands are moving away from each other as you inhale. And as you exhale, allowing them to soften back in together. Inhale, expanding the belly, expanding the chest, allowing the body to open. And exhale to soften and to release. And with the next exhale, releasing the hands down. And if you have the eyes closed, gently allowing light to come back into the eyes and coming back to the space.
Thank you, Helga. Just like to mention there as well, of course, silence is so important in our work too. And you've drawn on listening as well and taken that time to listen. So yeah, we might later in the questions and answers too, just to highlight the breath, of course, as well. In so many traditions is a way towards the spirit or the soul, if you like. And certainly during the creative inquiry too, we've become more interested in MusicAlive in terms, again, as we grow older. You know, there's opportunity really to explore maybe that part of our consciousness that when we're younger, we spend so much time running and doing in comparison to sometimes being. So we might again come back to that a little later. But just to highlight, yeah, that this again is an example of another area that during a project like this, there's been tremendous learning. I'm just aware of time now, so I think for these next sections, really, this is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, really. And I suppose our hope with this is really just to point out to you some practical resources or maybe work that we ourselves have found inspiring in our practice. So I don't think we're not going to get into too much detail here. And again, the majority of this information will be accessible on websites like artsandhealth.ie. So really, I'm going to return Susan back to yourself just for this, just to maybe tell us a little there of resources from a practical perspective that you found helpful for practice.
Thanks, Kevin. As you said, certainly this is a whistle-stop, not an exhaustive inquiry at all. But for me, and I know Helga and I have kind of compared notes, certainly Age and Opportunity is somewhere that we would recommend people to go. It is quickly becoming the kind of the catch-all nationwide website for all things older people. It's very nicely set up. You've got 3 very distinct areas. I think it's active, arts and engage. And then as you drill in through those 3 sections, you get loads of resources, workshops, videos, lots of documentation about best practices. They offer QQI level 6 training for anyone who is interested in working or facilitating arts activities with older people. So it's a massive resource, and certainly if I was advising anyone where to go, where to start looking, I would say ageandopportunity.ie is a fantastic resource. Kevin, as you touched on as well, artsandhealth.ie, which is managed by Waterford Healing Arts Trust. Again, phenomenal resource for anyone working in this area. Huge number of like really inspiring case studies, really nicely put together, and again, loads of resources around podcasts. The case studies are really, they're really high quality. You've got links to blogs, podcasts, videos, and policy documentation as well. And then you're looking at as well things like createireland.ie, and of course the Arts Council website itself. Then maybe at a local level, or looking at the arts that we're talking about here, music and dance, irishworldacademy.ie, which is University of Limerick. I attended a workshop with Hilary Moss and some of the voice therapy or singing therapy people from around the country. Keep an eye there for gatherings and information papers coming out. singireland.ie for all things singing. Helga mentioned rosettalive.com and also Dance Ireland. Arts for Health West Cork .com is a website specifically for arts practitioners working in care settings, so in community hospitals. Age and Opportunity have also created a full toolkit. It's literally called Toolkit for Arts and Creativity in Care Settings. So I'd recommend that also as a resource. Also to say that a lot of the detail around the work that we did in phase one, there is information available online, and we'll provide those links, but we have publications and we have videos and more information. Ellie has helped us with the lovely podcast series, and so we have all of that information centrally. We'll share that with you before we finish up here today.
Great, thank you, Susan. I'm just going to add a few you've mentioned. Again, you've covered, I hope you can see this again, the Participatory Arts Guidelines, which is available for download on artsandhealth.ie. This is a really valuable document in terms of a practical approach. Mary Grehan has also written a very interesting follow-on from this around 10 points to consider in arts and health practice. So these are both very practical documents that have informed our approaches. Just like to highlight this, the Creative Reverie, which is the work of Deirdre Walsh and Mayo, a visual artist. And this has gone back a number of years, but I think this is we found this a very inspiring publication around the notion of meeting the person as an artist, not trying to make the case that every person is an artist or trying to, make people become artists, but really seeing the creative potential in people. To go back to where we talked earlier, in terms of, seeing people focusing on the strengths rather than the weaknesses, really. I think Helga and Susan have both touched on this too, this idea of how we engage with people in a way that allows them the most opportunity to show their creative selves, really. Linked to that then, and combining the two areas we're talking about here, this is a book by Mike White, who's a lot of research again in this area, and Social Tonic is the subtitle for the book. But this is an interesting book because again, it crosses the boundaries between healthcare and community and where healthcare happens. Very quickly, some other interesting resources we found: the work of Liz Lerman and danceexchange.org certainly has influenced us. Pat Collins has made a fantastic documentary, which I actually haven't seen, but I heard amazing things on and an interview with Donald Deneen there. Pat Collins speak about the work of Henry Glassy and the role of the arts, and how the arts have, they're almost, he used the example of Janus, the Greek gods, being inward and outward facing, that the arts have an inward aspect for ourselves and yet connect us to other people. And a practical example for me, so when Arnold was working with Susan and Helga, the poetry seemed to bring people into that internal space, and bring us into our inner worlds, whereas music and dance by its nature is more social and communicative. And again, both have such value. Susan has mentioned here, I'd just like to highlight the Arts and Health Coordinators Ireland. And you'll find this again on artsandhealth.ie, so a mapping report that was published last year. And that shows that since 2001, there's 6 times more arts and health type activity nationally. So it just shows us over the past 20 years how far we've come. And this is a good point again, maybe to reflect on where we've come from and where we're going. So lastly, then I'd also like to just highlight the wonderful work of the Cultural Companions in Cork City. So Cultural Companions, you can find information online about again. And it's a project that Age and Opportunity were involved in getting off the ground. And it's a group that we've started to do some collaboration with. And I was blown away. There's an amazing piece by the broadcaster Evelyn Grant that you'll get online about the Tea and Ballet project. And what really struck me about the work of Cultural Companions again is that it's the agency of the people and the person's voice, and it's really driven by the participants. So very inspiring work there that comes highly recommended as well. And lastly, I'd just like to mention also the work of Anat Danielle is around movement again and healthcare. And Anat Danielle, she has these 9 principles of the 9 essentials, I think she describes as, but it really gives a very good insight to what's happening from a sort of neuroscientific point of view when we move. And again, actually, the voice is used a lot and the imagination is engaged. That seems to be a big part of the approach. So hopefully those resources are of some help. And we're going to move on now to our final question then. Just as we come to the end, to the first part of the session, really I'd just like to ask Helga, I think we're going to ask you first, and maybe Susan, you could come back, you could follow on then. Just for yourself, Helga, personally then as an artist, like what incentivizes you or motivates you in your work? I know you've touched earlier a little, but I'm maybe asking you to broaden, or maybe if there's any testimonies from participants also. So the question is a 2-part question in ways: the incentives for yourself and any observations of what you think incentivizes participants to get involved in arts and health type work.
So I think in one sense, it's like just the well-being and benefits that come with the arts work, and the connection of body and mind. That is very key and very important to me as well. And I think then to say that, and that links back to the quote that you mentioned earlier, that when we can walk, we can dance, and when we can talk, we can sing. Like often I think the arts are viewed as something that is kind of a bit out there or something kind of highbrow, but actually really movement and voice, the fabrics of our everyday life, and they are so key to being alive. And that for me is kind of connecting it back to the real essence of what we are as humans, that is really what inspires me and what I find is so important about the arts, and reminding ourselves of that and coming back to it. Okay.
Thank you, Helga. And Susan?
I think maybe just to add to what Helga said, I think for me, working in arts and health, I think that element of connection and being able to connect with other people, and to connect them in a different way through music, through movement, and that's something that's very, very inspiring. Certainly for me, I get an awful lot from that, and that fostering of community. I mean, even working in the creation part, we've made new friends, and I really feel in this work that we have built relationships and met people in both Mallow and in Mayfield who really they feel like family. And so fostering of community, I think, is really important, and connecting with other humans. That's intrinsic in the work. In terms of maybe things observed by the participants, I found it really interesting. At the men's shed, one of the gentlemen quoted to us that he felt that they bonded better. And I think it was through the experience of actually doing something new and something maybe that challenged them. They were all challenged together and at the same time. So that was a really nice comment to hear, that they felt that they bonded better. And we had another gentleman who spoke very specifically about, some of the warm-ups, the example that Helga maybe touched on with this earlier, with the breathing and the expanding your lungs and feeling the space in your body. One of the participants told us that he actually, not only did he feel that it improved his singing, but also he felt it when he went to swim in the swimming pool, that he could breathe better when he was swimming. So there was a very kind of specific health benefit communicated to us with that.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So really now we're gonna start to draw to an end to this first part. I'd like to thank Susan and Helga again for your tremendous work over the past 2 years. Really, it's having witnessed some of the work in action too, it really there's been plenty of magic in the room at times, which is often, as we've talked about, what we're really trying to what we hope we bring, really. It's a hope, obviously, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it's what we aspire to. In conclusion there, I know for the second part, Ellie and Miguel, we'll maybe reflect a little further and maybe summarize. Just again from MusicAlive's role in the project, I started out with that quote from the British Medical Journal 20 years ago. It's really heartening to be sitting here and seeing the amount of work that's happening, through the creative inquiry, and nationally seeing this work grow. And I suppose our aspiration is really to keep on keeping on with the work. I think it's important to highlight, the work, it's not, we're still, the work has challenges too. We've talked about a lot of the benefits about, it can be difficult work in terms of the energy that goes into the work, in terms of resources, so it's really just to highlight that we're not trying to paint a picture here this morning, that, this is an ongoing, this work is ongoing. And I suppose there's a link to that. It's like that message that each bit we all do in our own small ways. I suppose that's what MusicAlive, that's what we see our role of adding to this this work that, hopefully then, and I think there are heartening signs that we're heading in the right direction. It is, we might touch on that in the questions and answers, that that it is becoming more strategically placed within the health service. I know, again, I'll finish on this now, but I know that again, Sheila Broderick and Priscilla Lynch with Healthy Ireland, there has been work in the background happening between the HSE and the Arts Council towards a more strategic approach. So, that is heartening too, and gives us all hope for the future. And look, just finally then, I just like to, a few other thank yous, really, a little bit of housekeeping, just to say again to all the participants and everyone at Nazareth House and Mayfield, thank you so much for your involvement and your warm welcome. It's most appreciated. Our partner organisations and the funders of the Creative Inquiry, we as an organisation have learned so much from working with our partner organisations, that it's been, from an organisational perspective, such an inspiring project to be part of. This morning, I'd like to thank Brian there for his technical support from Sirius, obviously to Ellie there, and to Miguel as well, who you're going to hear more from later. Siobhan Clancy for her input into our structure for this morning's discussion. Thank you, Siobhan. That's your input is much appreciated. Also to mention there, Maeve Deneen and Mary Brady from the first phase of the Creative Inquiry were very supportive of the work of MusicAlive. So thank you as well. Barbara McCarthy and all our other associate artists at MusicAlive, colleagues at Cork Mental Health Services and HSE, Thank you to everyone. I'm going to stop there, and forgive me if I've left anyone out, but you know, from the heart, we thank everyone involved. I do want to very quickly mention that the slides you saw earlier, the images were taken by Eileen O'Leary, Isha Tutty Jackson, Thomas Madej Kazak, Emma Jervis, Richie Tyndall, and Samantha Hunt. So thank you all very much for permission to use the slides. Had we one more exercise, folks, or really should we go for the break? What do you? This is Arts and Health Work and Practice. We're responding in the moment now. So how are we doing in terms of time?
We might wrap up with a little, just a small little, just to kind of shake ourselves from the screen.
Right.
And just to, again, maybe incorporate some of the movement and the voice. I'm going to ask you all to just scrunch up all your shoulders, your face muscles, your hands, a whole lot, and we're going to release together, and we're going to go, and just give the hands a little shake out, and we're going to do that again. So tighten up everything and let it really scrunch up, and there you go, and let the shoulders drop again, nice and loose, short and sweet.
Thank you very much, Susan, and I'm sorry there, Troy. I know time is always difficult with these. So, Ellie, should I hand back to yourself now to wrap up then, or?
Yeah. So thank you very, very much. That was absolutely fascinating.